Did you know that a super Earth planet called Gliese 1214b exists that has pressures high enough to supposedly allow a plasma water to exist? Not solid, liquid, or gas, but plasma? Isn't that sick? I don't know much more about the nuances of it, but it makes me think about the plasma beam from Metroid, and that's cool. Anyhow, before we get into the Smash stuff, I just want to briefly do my YouTuber mandatory checkup involving this here graph, and telling y'all that not a lot of people are subscribed to my channel who watch it. Following this, everyone will immediately subscribe to me, filling my brain with artificial dopamine for yet another day. Now, with that out of the way, I'd rather not gives me a neat little fact regarding Luigi's down taunt. Luigi's down taunt normally deals 2.4% to the opponent. Its knockback is static, meaning it'll be the same no matter what percent you use it at, and it can even combo into other moves if you use it on stage. Now, if we were to turn on Stailing, you'll notice that the move does 2.5% now, an extra 0.1 or so percent of damage. However, no matter how many times we use the move, the damage will stay at 2.5%. This increase in damage from 2.4 to 2.5 suggests that the move is undergoing the freshness bonus, that being the very slight increase in damage when a move has no Stailing at all. And yet, this freshness bonus does not go away, despite multiple uses of the move, as no Stailing effect seems to be applied. So for some odd reason the game is able to apply the freshness bonus to the taunt attack, yet it fails to subsequently stale the move upon further use. I feel like it's possible that this was intentional, but it still feels odd to apply the freshness bonus when Stailing as a whole doesn't affect this type of move. Also, a quick fun fact about Stailing, but how much a move stales is actually preserved even if Stailing is off. Basically, if I jab Mario once when Stailing is on, it deals 2.5%. However, if I jab once with Stailing off, turn it back on, then jab again, the jab will do 2.1%. The same amount of damage as if I did both jabs with Stailing on. We can see this even more clearly if I do 5 jabs with Stailing off. Obviously all of them do 2.4%, then when we turn Stailing back on, the next jab will only do 1.4%, almost half as much damage, despite technically being the first jab used in this Stailing on environment. Anyhow, back to the topic at hand, I tested this out with Greninja and the same is true here. The move will not stale, and the freshness bonus also seems to be present here even if each individual hit shows up as doing 0.6%. The total of all 4 hits does 2.5% instead of 2.4%, so there's a very slight increase. And I also tested this out with Snake's box, and again no Stailing seems to happen. It's a bit more difficult to test here since the exact damage that the move will do will vary quite a bit, since the move may hit Mario at a different time given whatever Mario's idle animation is. So to circumvent this, I'm having Mario rapid jab so everything stays consistent. Here we can see that, again, with Stailing on, the taunt does the same amount of damage every time at 2.7%. And we can also see that the freshness bonus is present as after 4 boxes the total percent dealt is 11.1%, whereas with no Stailing on at all, 4 boxes deals just 11%. I also tested what it was like if Mario then grabbed the box and threw it himself, and again there's no Stailing, but there's also no freshness bonus present. I believe this is just because the box is treated as a throwable item here, rather than an attack, and throwable items neither stale nor get a freshness bonus. Man, I really did spoil you guys by going over the title content so early on in the video. As thanks, you should keep watching with this next fact from Super Mario Master 2 regarding Luigi's up taunt. This is a bit of a small one, but in the character trailer for Luigi, his up taunt animation is actually slightly different from the one in the final game. That is, the last pose he does normally is an expression of just basic shock or fear, the classic Home Alone pose. But in the trailer, we see that the final expression is a bit different, with his eyes closed and slightly more anguished than just shock, as if he was about to be murdered. What's interesting is that the version that's in the final game is the version that's always been in the games, in Smash 4 and in Brawl and so on. So I guess they were trying something new with this taunt at first, but just scrapped it before the final version. Next, Anna gives me a really interesting fact regarding Game & Watch's oil panic and the victory screen. We've gone over on the channel before how when someone gets hit by Game & Watch's oil panic, for a second or two the opponent will be covered in oil. This is a purely aesthetic thing. However, if you were to hit the winning opponent with oil panic right as the match ends, you'll see for a short while that the character is covered in oil, in their victory screen. This happened for everyone I tested too, even folk like Joker, or Sephiroth, who have slightly more unique victory screens. And in Joker's case, notice that he is covered in oil, but Morgana is not. So for some reason, whatever attributes are applied when someone is covered in oil is maintained throughout their victory screen. I had never seen anything like this happen before, which we can see when we test with Inkling's ink. I tested it in a few different ways too, with a few different timings, but the ink effect never lingered on the victory screen. And the same is true for the metal box. So for whatever reason, this seems to be specific with the oil effect. So that's really interesting. Now I want to move on to some Sephiroth stuff. First, I need to point out how in my last video I came to the conclusion that healing does not get rid of Sephiroth's Wing. However, as I was told several times, this isn't necessarily the case. Now see, when I initially tested it, I used the logic that changing percents in training mode would work for the test, since changing the percents manually allowed you to get the wing. So if doing it manually worked there, then lowering the percent manually should also work. Since this wasn't the case, and a lot of healing items didn't do anything to the wing, I just came to the conclusion that healing didn't work. Lucky me, I was just barely short of the necessary logic for this, as it turns out that if you heal specifically 450%, then the wing will go away. And no matter which environment you're in, 450% is a lot to heal. But this is very important to note because it seems that the amount that you'll have to heal will be affected by things like how much damage you've dealt. Notice here I've dealt about 180%, and then, only after a single heart container, my wing disappeared. This means the act of healing also adds to the hypothetical counter that we went over in my last video, the counter that determines when your wing goes away. So it's not only a factor of how many KOs you've done and how much damage you've dealt, but also how much you've healed, all factors playing simultaneously to determine whether or not you keep your wing. Now, practically speaking, you're much more likely to see the KO or damage factors come into play way more than the healing one, but this extra information is really important and interesting in understanding how Sephiroth's Wing works. Continuing with Sephiroth, Anime Villager gives me a good little fact about Shadowflare and the Ice Climbers. This fact is pretty simple, but if you hit the secondary Ice Climber with Shadowflare, no orb will appear around them. The Shadowflare will be able to hit both of them though, so it's not like the secondary Ice Climber will provide any sort of protection. Luma on the other hand will provide this protection, by soaking up the entire Shadowflare and preventing the orbs from appearing. Sticking to Shadowflare though, Dark Redoom gives me a good fact regarding what happens when you reflect Shadowflare. In Sephiroth's presentation, Sakurai pointed out what happens when you reflected the Shadowflare orbs, but he never pointed out what happens when you reflect that initializing hit. And what happens is that the orbs get applied to you, and twice as many of them do. Normally the lowest charge just gives you 1 orb, but here Sephiroth gets 2. And a full charge normally does 3, but when it gets reflected you get all 5 in one go. Which is pretty dangerous, as normally you can only get 5 orbs around someone with at least 2 Shadowflares. Of course, this doesn't allow you to exceed that 5 orb limit, and it doesn't seem that the orbs themselves get stronger, only that initializing hit does. What's also interesting to note is that the Shadowflare that's reflected onto you is still technically owned by you. Normally, one Sephiroth can only have a total of 5 Shadow Orbs at once. If this one nest has 3, then I can only apply an additional 2 to the other nests, and so on. And when I apply 3 orbs to this nest, the Shadowflare that gets reflected can only give Sephiroth 2 orbs, and so on. Also, yes, you can pocket this initializing hit, and it works the same as reflecting. As for the orb limit, the amount of orbs that the reflect will give you will depend on how many orbs are already active. If none, then 5. If 1, it'll only give 4, and so on. Next, Player Red asks how Stailing works with the Shadowflare. Stailing is pretty interesting with this move. The initializing hit works just as normal, where each hit stales the next one. But with the orbs themselves, how stale they are depends on which flare that you hit it with. Let me explain it another way. A fresh orb deals 8.1%, as we can see here. And when you charge the move and create multiple orbs at the same time with one flare, every individual orb does 8.1%. However, the moment you use another Shadowflare to add another orb to the ring, that orb that you add will be a staled version. You'll notice here that the damage still says 8.1%, but that's because the most recent orb that you apply, and therefore the most staled one, is the one that attacks first. Or rather, the first one that you apply, and therefore the freshest one, is the one that attacks last, and is thus what you see here. So if I apply all 5 orbs individually, the 5th orb is the most stale. And when they all attack, the damage each orb deals goes up, because it's attacking from most stale to least stale. And of course, if you apply 1 orb, then 3 orbs, the first 3 will deal the staled 7.1%, and the last orb will be the fresh 8.1%. So if you want to maximize damage with this move, apply orbs all together rather than one at a time. Not that anyone was really doing it one at a time anyhow. Next, I saw a tweet from Otter regarding Mewtwo's down air animation that I wanted to point out. That is, apparently Mewtwo's down air has him using his foot to create the energy blast, instead of it just being created with his hand. This frame in particular is what really made me think that it was made with some sort of palm swipe or whatever. I can't be the only one who thought that, right? This is just like with how Palutena's down air is executed with her leg, as a sweeping kick instead of with her staff like I once thought. It's obvious now, but it took me by surprise when I first learned about it. Now looking frame by frame at the move, we can sort of visualize the hitbox here. And when I see this, I think it's still kind of possible that the arm created the energy burst, and that energy burst just happens to be in front of the leg. But when I go into a match and look in the camera frame by frame, we can clearly see that the energy is manifesting directly from the foot. So without question, this move is using Mewtwo's foot. Another move that's like this for me is Donkey Kong's down air. Looking at the animation, I feel like you'll just assume that he's punching downwards, right? With how he's swinging his arm immediately before the hit, your brain will sort of fill in the gaps like that. But again, slowing it down, we see that he's actually using his foot to slam downwards, not his arm. Now I almost feel like it'd be more effective for him to punch, but hey, I'm sure DK knows better than me. Lastly, for this video, I have a test I wanted to perform regarding Rob and his gyro. Now I admit that the idea for the test came from a prompt I had gotten as a submission, but I've since lost that, so I apologize to whoever submitted it. But the gyro that Rob shoots out will match their general color scheme. And when Rob picks up his own gyro, he's actually able to charge it again. And if you finish the charge or cancel it in any way, you'll see that the gyro is gone, meaning Rob effectively put it away. So what happens when one Rob picks up the personalized gyro from another Rob? Well, nothing. That Rob will charge their own gyro, and if they finish that charge or whatever, they'll still be holding the other Rob's gyro. And of course, if that Rob's gyro is already in play, then the charge just won't work. So no wonky business, Rob can only recharge a picked up gyro if it's his own. Anyhow, I think that'll do it for today's video. I'd like to thank my patrons Felipe Morla, Avenkaru, Burbo, Linkdorf, Parade Dino, Raighne, Daneplay, Feurolant, Skully, Aman Shareef, Keck the Dragon, Skim Milk, Stan Luna, and Zamari. For this end of the video section, I very quickly want to rant about a little trend I sometimes see in the comment sections of my videos. On the channel, I've gone over a lot of tests regarding Hero's Metal Slash, and very recently I even tested how Metal Slash works against Steve's Iron Blocks. Now, I'm not going to name any names, but I've seen several comments whose sentiments are, well, of course Metal Slash doesn't work if you use it on iron, or something to that effect. Basically, it implies that metal is its own material, in a separate category like how you'd separate iron and gold. Perhaps from a game development standpoint this could be the case, but in reality, metal is an umbrella term used for a lot of different materials, those with a lustrous appearance and good conductivity and all that. Basically, every blue element here on the periodic table. Yes, this includes gold and, well, iron. Yes, iron is a metal. That is why I try to test out how Metal Slash works against iron materials, because it just makes logical sense. Especially when you think about how the move Kaklang, the move that Metal Slash was essentially made for, used to be called Iron Eyes in Dragon Quest III. Regardless though, overall the comments are usually lovely, so keep it up. Also, I recently finished and uploaded a song that you should definitely listen to. I've been looking how I'd get them uploaded onto Spotify since that's something that's been requested a few times, but I'll have to learn more about it first and if that'll cost me anything or whatever. I don't compose enough to get into anything too professional or whatever, you know? Anywho, stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.